We're going to go on live right now. Oh, I should put this home.
Hello, world.
Hello. We're live for the first time, I think. Doing the podcast. We're actually, Joseph is over here today. Joe Dara, right here.
Hello.
And so you're here today. You do a lot of the Dungeon Crate lives with me, and so we like to. In fact, we've done the past couple of DnD5e podcasts together, and we decided that it would be really fun to talk about monstrous races this time. So,
ooh, yes, some of my favorite races.
Yes, and we're gonna just adjust this. Let's try and get this. There we go. All right. So here's the thing. Everything is backwards there. Is that really happening? Why is that? That's weird.
That's a good question.
Right? I don't know. So I am going to. I don't know how we share this. We're gonna try and share this somehow. I don't know. Do we just do this?
Is it up in your triple dot options up there?
No, I don't.
The top of the
so.
chat. The top of the chat. There's
right here. Okay. Let's look. All right. So we are getting stuff ready for this since there's nobody on here right now. Anyways, we have a little bit of time. DnD5e TV. I wonder if I can just go to that.
Maybe if you right click on the actual video itself.
Oh, nope. It's not doing that. Oh, wait. Duh. That's right there. How about that?
That would work.
Let's see. Leave the site. So no, I don't want to leave the site. So I'm gonna go ahead and copy it. All right, and what we're gonna do here is I'm gonna go ahead and that's really not the way to say it. So I'm gonna go ahead and share this monster. How do you spell monstrous?
Oh, before the U. US.
What? There we go.
There we
Monstrous
go.
races.
Monstrous races.
All right, and I'm just going to put this here. Monstrous races. We're going to go ahead and put the link there. So hopefully, we can publish this.
Okay.
And we can also do that on the DnD5e. All right. So I'm just going to do this right here.
Early morning, isn't it?
Isn't it? Yes. Okay, here. There. And we're going to leave the link there. So if you'd like to as well, go ahead and share this and let us know. Oh, that's great. Has our preview and everything. All right, we're going to do that. Okay, so we're going to see if we can, we'll just see how this works. It's kind of a tester. Of course, the podcast will be, the podcast itself will be an edited version. So, the live part is just kind of to capture those people that want to sit in. If you want to comment, please go ahead. Now, was this a new hold? Potentially inappropriate messages. Not now. All right. So we've got a chat here going. And if you want to chime in, feel free. We're going to see what happens here. So we're going to just start the show. If I can get to here first. This might be something, too, we can Twitch. But at the moment, we're just going to do it on YouTube and see. So,
yeah.
All right. And welcome to another episode of the DnD5e podcast. My name is Wayne.
And my name is Joe.
And today, so this is something that we've been talking about for quite a while. And it's kind of a source of contention between us. And it was so ripe for a topic, monstrous character classes.
Yes, something that you're uncomfortable with. I'm very comfortable with.
Yes.
And hopefully we can see a little bit of each other's sides.
We're going to try. So a monstrous character class. Now, kind of started. When do you think? Third edition, second edition?
I think
maybe
it started in. I think it started in second edition, but really became much more commonplace in third edition and 3.5 because third edition and 3.5 vastly expanded the number of races. The way that the characters were constructed in 3.5 and third edition made it so that you could pretty much play any race that was statted as a monster.
Right. So that, but okay. Now, right there is the question that I have. So why would you want to do that in the first place? When you've spent your whole career, D&D career, killing these things?
Well, something I've always thought about is what about thinking about these sort of races instead of as a monster to be killed, but as an actual active race, which means that more than just being a faceless mook that's always some flavor of evil or neutral,
right,
and always out to get the greater good that is humans, elves, and dwarves. What if they are actively growing cultures in their own right? So maybe the orcs seem barbaric because they're more of a Mongolian or Assyrian culture than we would be used to.
True. So I guess first off, let's talk about some of the monstrous races that are already readily available that are now normal character classes, especially in 5th edition.
Yes. So like I said, 3.5 made it very, very easy to stat monsters as character classes. 5th edition went a little bit beyond that in that it gave us, especially in Volos, it gave us a set of races, some of which are sort of sub-monstrous, but very exotic, like the Aasimar, which are the angel people.
Right.
And then others which are actually straight up monstrous, like the goblins and the kobolds and the bugbears. If you have Volos, you can find those on page 118 and 119 and the following couple pages. And they give you direct stats and abilities. And some of them are really neat and really fit the monsters themselves. So like orcs are very aggressive, so they can move very quickly when they're approaching you.
Right. And well, and also now in 5th edition, we've got tieflings, some more kind of demon race. And of course, the ever popular dragonborn.
Oh, yes. So those very exotic side of things, which for you as an early D&D player are going to seem very, very strange, especially if you're falling into the category of the more Tolkien-esque D&D.
Right.
But for me as a 3.5 player, a tiefling seems like pretty standard fare. It's just something that comes out of the city of Sigil, and you have these beings that have been touched by Asmodin and the forces of Gehenna.
That's what is okay. So those are all explained in there. There's different pros and cons to each race, including the races with, of course, the normal races that you have with the elf, dwarf, human, half elf, gnome, hobbits, and whatnot. But and so, what is it that attracts people to a monstrous race?
Well, there's a number of different factors, and it depends on the kind of player you are. The Dungeon Master's Guide is very good about talking about the different types of players. For example, a very common type of player that I run into as a Dungeon Master is the Optimizer player. That's someone who is strictly optimizing their character to be as strong as possible. Right. They want to complete every possible aspect, and they find that numbers game very interesting and important. I saw this a lot in 3.5, in particular with the Minotaur race. Basically, Minotaurs had a racial weapon that was very, very silly. It had I I think, D12 damage roll. It had a crit multiplier of ×4, and it had a crit range. So if you hit this thing, you were going to be hitting very, very hard. And then the Minotaurs themselves had very good stats,
right?
Especially for their actual level cost as a character race.
Now, I did play a Minotaur in 4th edition, and I had that, and that was fun. I played a Minotaur that couldn't, well, it was kind of the Groot rocket thing. So my gnome warlord rode on the back of this Minotaur, and is the only one that can understand them. And all he can say is, "My name is Worf." So he couldn't talk. He had a curse on him. So, so it was interesting, and this was like the Underdark dungeon crawl. So it was already kind of filled with strange. In 4th edition, you also have strange powers. It's a lot different. It seemed really comfortable to play. Didn't mind doing it. Had a lot of fun actually playing a Minotaur and really trying to develop its kind of culture. And what I found about playing this was, well, just I think typically what you would normally find. How common are these creatures in the land that you're in? If somebody's looking at so my initial problem with these monster classes is that I am an old school player, and I do like your standard races, and I find that it just doesn't. It just seems like a lot of players were wanting to jump in and create this fantasy world where they were a fairy, or hey, I'm this or this, I'm a vampire, or I'm a, and it just didn't seem like in the worlds that I created, this would be commonplace. And it would just be nuts to see a dragonborn walk into a tavern full of these, humans or a little bit of a mixed race there. But it kind of made me think, all right, well, what are the kind of people that want to play this? And let's start there. If you're considering a monstrous race, what kind of level of player should you be?
Well, I agree entirely with you that in general, monstrous races are not going to be a common thing. And because of that, there's some really unique challenges that are associated with monstrous races. To that end, I would say if you want to improve on your ability to role play and you want to really challenge yourself in the storytelling aspect,
right.
Something that I really enjoy as a player and a DM, then I would agree entirely. Play a monstrous race. It's a very challenging thing to think about all of those differences. But if you're just a new player, or you're someone who's only interested in the stat side of things, or you're only interested in your character's story in and of themselves, not necessarily the story of their race or how they interact with the world, you're just interested in who they are as a hero or as a villain, depending on the case, then really find a way to do those same sort of stats in a different place. Leave monstrous races what they are in the normal D&D session. I don't think that at least a storytelling DM like myself or an old school DM like you is going to enjoy having a player who's just there to have a monstrous race as a facade. If you want to have an enjoyable monstrous or exotic race, you really need to get in tune with it and play it. And I think that's why they offer such a valuable learning opportunity for role play.
All right. So you're saying for a more experienced player, this might be, somebody that knows how to play, the difference of role playing a dwarf character as opposed to a human or an elf, and is pretty versatile in being able to take that character and create a rich setting around it, background, being able to play the character like it's should be played as far as the typical race goes. So they're already used to doing that. Now you're going to take it and play a creature that you don't have anything in the normal realm, normal human Earth. You have no context here of what their life is really like. If you're playing a kobold or even a minotaur, what is life like for that minotaur race? So, a little bit of research, I think, and a little bit of backstory is super important in order to fit this in, especially if you were the only monstrous class in your adventuring party.
Oh, absolutely. One of my favorite situations is to talk about a kobold character trying to convince people that they are a draconic race, that they are like the Dragonborns. When your kobold first shows up, the initial thing is a lot of people are going to treat kobolds the way that kobolds are often used in modules, which is as a first to third level mook character that you essentially go up, you hit once or twice, and then they fall down and die. Well, especially with the stats in 5th edition of kobolds, they're one of the worst races to play straight up stat wise. They have a lot of potential for negatives. One of their abilities is literally called grovel, cower, beg.
Yes.
If you want to play a character who's out to show that kobolds are strong and kobolds are this mighty dragon race that's capable of great good, then you're going to have to work against that. In some ways, you're not even going to want to use grovel, cower, beg because it demeans your character. What self-righteous paladin or what strong barbarian would want to grovel, cower, and beg before their enemies?
Yes, it's true. But if a kobold that was more of a, survivor or rogue or something, they may use that as a sense of deception, because we went up against them in the latest DC Dungeon Crate Roll 20, and we went up against those kobolds, and they were that's what happened at the end. And it does give you some disadvantages when that's happening. It gives advantages actually to the other kobolds, right? Yeah.
Yes.
So what would be that's the thing. You would have to kind of decide what kind of place setting that kobold is in, and if he's going to be, and what happens if that kobold is also in a party with a dragonborn, and how do they interact with each other? I mean, how do they interact with the general realm overall?
Well,
city to city, you're walking into a city, and I guess if the DM is allowing these monstrous races, he's already got a world that's going to be either accepting or not.
And I find that especially if you've managed to convince an old school DM to play a monstrous race like this. So, for example, if I had convinced you that, oh, let me play this kobold character that I have, they're going to be really good. Just wait and find out. I find that sort of adversarial nature of the old school DM can actually help to build the story in the beginning.
Because even the players as well.
Well, you're going to walk into this tavern.
Like, what?
You're going to walk into this tavern. You're going to have the player party. You're going to have the NCPs controlled by the DM.
Yeah.
So first off, the tavern guy is going to stare at you and go, "The heck is a kobold doing in my tavern? This does not belong. We don't want this here."
Or even the patrons.
Yeah. You're going to... There's very few times as a player character that in a good aligned city, you will walk into the city and everyone in the city will draw swords on you.
Yeah.
But as a monstrous race, that can happen very commonly.
Right.
And if you are lawful good or neutral good, then your reaction to that has to be some way to diffuse the situation without that sort of combative conflict. Because if you have that combative conflict, that's going to go against what you as your character want to have happen. You're out there to convince people that you're good, not to convince people that the stereotypes about you are right.
Exactly. And also, you don't want to hinder, I think, the party in the quest as a whole. So starting out, the first thing you should do is check with your dungeon master, your game master.
Absolutely. And
you need to find out if this is something that your dungeon master wants to have in the campaign, because a lot of times people are like, oh, I want to be this, I want to be this. And then he's like, ah. So it's kind of like researching the realm that you're going to be playing in. And it's only considerate to ask the dungeon master, hey, can I play this? I'd like to play this. And here's why. I think also having a reason why you want to play this rather than I just want to be a fairy, or I think the Dragonborn is badass and I'm,
well,
I'm
and
a
I
big
think
guy and I can play it easy because I love dragons and dragons are badass.
I think we ran into this the very first play session that I did with you for a Dungeon Crate module.
Right.
I actually brought a water genocide barbarian. Yeah, gladiator barbarian.
Yeah,
gladiator bard.
Which was
gladiator bard.
Strange.
And I came and brought this water genocide character, and I was like, so this is what I have. And your initial reaction was to look at me and go, well, I never allow that. But we'll let it go for now. I think by the end of the session, I managed to convince you that it was actually a very compelling character.
Well, I think in that point too, we ended up going, well, yeah. I mean, it seemed to work, and mainly where we were adventuring it wasn't like that. There wasn't any opportunity for a crowd to be like freaked out by you or anything yet, which I still think is something that a DM should consider.
Oh, absolutely. Where we were, it actually worked somewhat to my advantage. In particular, we were approaching the bandits themselves, and I, in typical bard fashion, and typical gladiator fashion, actually, said, I go up and knock on the front door.
Right.
Well, you go, well, why are you going to do that? And I said, because I am a beautiful, charismatic blue lady who's very strange and exotic, and I think I can convince them I'm a belly dancer.
And I think also that it has to do with how you looked at the time and what is this doing, or it can take some people off guard, like what? So that gives you advantage in some way. So yeah, I mean, that seemed to work in that particular campaign. I liked it a lot. I think it was cool.
Yeah, and in that way, I didn't approach it, for instance, as a bard, but I actually approached it as a genocide. I'm a water elemental. If I want to convince my way into this bandit hideout or trick them in some way, very first thing I'm going to do is fall back to my racial abilities. And my racial abilities, well, I control water. So let's start doing animations with these water bubbles around me because I can control water, And
that'll take them off guard if they've never seen or were used to anything like that before.
Especially for some country bandits.
So when people are looking to, let's talk about what was the next thing that we were looking at. This is kind of an overview of, why or how you should approach playing a monstrous character class. Let's look into how, and we talked about backgrounds in the last podcast. So again, you might want to listen to that and figure out how you can integrate. Once you get the okay from the DM, yeah, I'm going to play this. We're just going to use Kobold as an example, because half orcs were like the first, kind of monstrous race to play. And I remember when that was popular to have a half orc in your party because, man, they can do some damage. And there's also that conflict between that, which you can play on as well. I think a monstrous character class is definitely the main reason you should pick it is because you want to explore role playing a little deeper, not just on a surface level, but you have to not only then have your role playing down, you have to have your backstory down, you have to have a reason for this and that. And it just makes it so much more interesting because it is you're doing this because it's interesting. So playing a kobold character, being able to write up its stats and get the background and then start playing and seeing if you can integrate what kind of I don't know, hindrances could happen from playing that, or would you? Because I've heard of people to actually taking on, not really, this isn't a hindrance, but where you have your D&D group play the enemies. So you have a party of monsters, or whether you're a band of orcs or a band of misfit monsters, and you go around and you try and you're out to actually take out other what would be player characters.
Yes, the evil campaign.
Yeah, or not even evil, or just trying to survive. You guys are just like everybody else, but these guys keep trying to fight you, and they keep trying to chase you out of everywhere. And they're like, come on.
I think a really good way to approach a monstrous race or a very exotic player race is actually to treat it sort of like a second or third flaw on your character backstory.
I see. That's a good way of looking at it. Yeah,
because it's much less like it's negative all the time, and much more like it's negative at very important times, but other times it's not going to make that big a difference. If you're out fighting bandits out in the country, no one's going to care who you are,
right?
As long as you're stopping the bandits. if you are walking into the main cathedral as a kobold paladin and saying, well, I worship a god who's in the same pantheon as your god, I would like to come and take sacrament with you guys, then you're going to get the sideways glances and the whole row of clerics and paladins sort of brushing their war axes and maces. You want to be aware that you're going to have to diffuse situations a lot of times.
Right. Which could also burden the DM as well. Yes. Again, when you're looking at like, okay, is this going to fit into this adventure and this campaign? And one of the problems that a DM might have is like, man, now I have to do more, because just a reaction from anybody that any situation I put you in is going to be something that we've got to now really kind of work out. And it may add extra negatives to the whole quest, or it may hinder the quest. That was one of my big problems. Plus, people coming, I want to play a unicorn. Like, what game are you playing? This is my D&D. Don't mess with it. You get to play an elf, a dwarf, or a gnome, or a human. No, you don't get to play a drow either. I was not even a fan of drows. Like, no, I want you to fight those guys. And I never liked people that play evil characters in my campaign either. So I never did that. But it does give a certain amount of more work to a dungeon master that is not, say it is a little bit like, hey, you are a bit rare, or even not, just as a character class. Like, okay, kobolds are, those are common. But again, if you're going to play that in as a class, that DM now has to work out, okay, well, when you guys go into the city, what are you going to do? Here's what the reactions are. So you have to figure out, okay, well, what is the general consensus around this region of these races? And are they common adventurers? I mean, you're going to walk into any tavern, you're going to see a dwarf, an elf, a kobold, a human. Is that normal? Do you know the difference between the aggressive cultures and the ones that are a little more, for lack of a better word, cultured?
Well, and I think one of the ways that you can sort of work, sort of dip your feet in, especially as a DM and a player combo, is actually to play a monstrous character who's at a higher level. So, for example, level 8, level 9, right, where you've already got a background that you are somewhat famous. So you can go into a place and say, well, my name is Yidra, and I am the bardic kobold from such and such a region. And they're going to be able to go, oh, we've been hearing stories about you. You've been doing some things that we don't associate with kobolds. You saved that little town. So there's going to be a sort of, they're not going to really like you, but it's going to be much easier on the DM, because the DM can say, they'll give you a first chance.
Right.
So prove yourself now, which is still going to be harsher than would normally go towards a player character.
So there's a lot more work too for the player when you're developing a monstrous race, because you also have to be ready for those types of situations. You got to have your responses for it. And I think this is something that I think if you're going to play a monstrous race, I talked about the different types of role playing that you can do. So you're either doing a narrative, or you're doing an actual acting out. Anything that you say is what your character says. And I think that a combination of those is what is needed for a monstrous character class, because if you just go in and go, oh, my guy just attacked, and if you're just a very one-dimensional player that has a character that is a kobold that has so much opportunity for interesting role play, and you don't do anything with it, that's another one of my problems. And again, we talked about this, that I think the DM's got to trust the player that you are going to be able to play that character properly, and not just disrupt the entire quest, disrupt the entire party, and just because you wanted to be special. I want to be a unicorn. A unicorn.
I would agree entirely. This is one of those moments that you as a player ought to have the most work. If the DM is having to work hard because you're wearing,
yes.
If you're taking up this mantle as a monstrous race, and the DM is having to work through the MacGuffins and those sort of things, then you're not really playing a monstrous race
Right.
to the depth that it needs to be played.
No, that is the perfect, and that should be the mantra of every player is don't make more work for the DM. I mean, come on, he's got enough work already. So yeah, definitely. If you were gonna, I think that's super important. Not only do you, again, all the work, so just keep that mantra in your head. I want to play a kobold. Well, you don't even need to convince the dungeon master or whatnot, as long as you've got all your stuff together. Like, hey, look, here's the kobold, but here's the backstory. Here's how it can work into our campaign, and especially if it's resistant like I am. So I'm really talking about if you were approaching a dungeon master like myself. And here's how I want to work it in with the existing party, because now I know that all of the other 3 players, I know what they're playing, what their character classes and races are. And also, I think the DM would, gives the players, usually will typically give the players a little backstory on the quest or on the scenario or on the campaign they're going to be doing. So yeah, don't make more work for the dungeon master. Make it a point where you can actually have everything together, because I think that's also, again, going to stretch your role playing. As you're writing out the background, as you are doing this, you're actually prepping yourself for role play. You know what you're going to say now when tavern patrons look at you or ask you questions like, what is your kind doing here? You can have responses for that, and you have reactions, which will do nothing more than inspire the dungeon master to expand on that role play or expand on that quest, or maybe find inspiration to give you a side quest, because hey, this is a great, everybody's going to love this, and we need to go find this thing from your family who it got stolen by these humans, and now you want to get it back for your clan so that you can regain your prestige. And the rest of your party knows that you're a decent kobold. You're loyal to them. So I mean, it does give some interesting opportunities for both the player and the DM to expand on any quest for anybody. But yeah, and I think, but see, that was my problem. So that's the only parameters that I would have. Don't make more work for me. Also, make it fit into my my world. And if it doesn't fit in my world, don't play it, or don't get mad when I don't allow it. What are some of your favorite monster classes?
Well, my personal favorites
character classes, yeah.
I think it might be pretty obvious that my personal favorite is the kobold, and part of the reason I like the kobold as a race is because it was specifically made to have some of the worst stats. Period.
They're supposed to be really easy creatures to defeat, and that's your first level between the kobolds and small orcs or whatnot. Kobolds are like, they come in force. So they're best when they are in a large group.
Well, and just you as a person working through how to make those situations bend to your advantage it makes for a very interesting play style. With the kobold, you have pack tactics. So if you're within range of an ally, you're within 5 feet of an ally, you have advantage. Now, a large majority of the time, if you're doing dungeon crawls or you're indoors or it's nighttime, that's going to be awesome. That's straight up their best ability.
Right.
But on the flip side of things, you have -2 strength, which immediately makes you hit for a whole lot less, especially if you're doing something real silly like a kobold barbarian. But you also have sunlight sensitivity, and sunlight sensitivity is one of the worst traits that you can actually get on a character class, and that's if you're in natural sun,
like even a human, because ouch, burning, you can't even get out and adventure much in the sun.
Well, it's in a large number of dungeons, sunlight sensitivity isn't going to matter.
Right.
But if you're going to the dungeon, if you're camping out, if you're fighting out in the open, if you're approached in the village square, you need to find a way to either protect your eyes and block out the sun, or you're going to have to deal with the fact that you need to be next to an ally to be effective. Otherwise, you will always have disadvantage.
Well, which is interesting too, because kobolds, and when you look at it that way, the pack advantage, when they have that with the other kobolds, does come into play with your party, because they know how to work best in a pack, in a team, in a group. They'll see how the party is working, and then you can take your kobold and go, okay, I'm seeing how everybody works. Well, I have very great proficiency in working as a team. That's what I do best. So
well,
here we go.
I actually have a pair of kobold characters that I might actually put up and
your
and
twins.
post.
Your twins.
Yes, the kobold twins are very fun, and I hope that I can bring them in one of our modules and live stream it for everyone.
Oh, yeah.
The idea behind the kobold twins is they're less one character, less two characters, and more one character with two bodies. Basically, you have one kobold is a rogue, a swashbuckler rogue, very charismatic, very good at doing high single target damage. And then the other is a very intentionally tanky kobold ranger. And that kobold ranger has horde breaker and the ability to stop large groups and deal with forces of less powerful but more plentiful enemies.
Right.
And then the pair of them work together. So if they're out in the sunlight, they're always next to each other because they're twins, and they're going to sort of fight on one another and give each other advantage. If they're out in the dungeon, then the ranger is going to go forward first, be the tank, make sure no one can get past them. And this ranger is the more logical of the twins, and they are going to make sure that they're approaching this situation in the logical manner. And then you're going to have our swashbuckling rogue is going to come in and be the very charismatic sort of face of the party. So when you have your group together and you're trying to convince the other player characters that these two kobolds are really good, the first person they're going to relate to is actually going to be the swashbuckling rogue, because they're very charismatic and they're easy to get along with. But then the person that you're eventually going to rely on for battle tactics is going to be the ranger, because the ranger is the more logical of the pair and less prone to rash decisions and rushing in and those sort of things.
Well, so all right, let's look at this. What are some resources that people can use if they want to play any certain race, exotic race, or a monstrous character class? And what would be some things that you definitely wouldn't want them to play?
Well,
so resources would be Volos, like you got.
Volos is awesome. I really like the way Volos is set up. I do think that Volos has a lot of really good material on backgrounds, but I think that there are a few errors in that sometimes it falls into the very stereotypical. And if you want to play a monstrous race, stereotypical is fine sometimes, but a lot of times I will find it more interesting if your character is not stereotypical.
Right.
And
well, it shouldn't be if you are actually playing it as a character class or as your player character, because it's that there's a reason for that. Yes. That's the whole that's the whole thing.
Yes.
So can you use the monster manual and pull any random thing out of it? Can I,
that very much so depends on your campaign. In terms of the monster manual, I would say something that's semi-humanoid, like a kobold. I see some very compelling characters that are made to be like good vampires or vampire spawn, so not necessarily as strong as a vampire,
right?
But sort of they've overridden that innate evil. Also, some very compelling characters that are made as like risen demons. So you have a demon or a devil that has
got your Hellboy character going.
Yeah, they've gained the ability to do some amount of good. Those can be very, very compelling characters. I would stay away from monsters that are going to be too feral or or
Your
they're
trolls
natural.
There's just some things that I would say absolutely not. You can't play a troll. You don't get to be a troll.
Well, and
or you don't get to be an ogre, maybe a half ogre.
So, for example, one of the classics in this instance would be an ooze.
Yeah, I want to be a gelatinous
ooze.
cube.
Yeah, don't play a gelatinous cube. Don't play a standard ooze because they're mindless. They just want to eat. If you want to have an ooze character, stat it. I personally statted an ooze race, the Limussi, for one of my homebrew worlds. And that was how I worked around that problem, because I do enjoy the idea of a character who has blind sight and a number of other really unique traits that make them very interesting to play,
and not always positive traits. Some of these are definite, and I really like playing characters, classes, characters that have an issue, like a very low strength, or some disadvantage, or they can't speak, or they're blind in an eye, something like that. See here,
James.
He was wondering about the disadvantage from sensitivity. That's what he was wondering about. And Dragonkin. Yes, we talked about the Dragonborn as being one of the standard, what I would consider monstrous races in 5th edition. And then we were talking, definitely the kobolds that we were talking about that you can use.
Yes.
So but it has to fit in. I mean, there's no way you can play certain. You can't play a dragon. You can't play. I wouldn't. There's a lot of things that should not be character classes at all. For players to play, at least in my opinion. But
and there's a lot of situations where I say it's going to come down to your prowess as a role player.
Okay.
So, for example, I trust my ability to role play characters very, very well. So if I really wanted to, I bet that I could get away with playing the only good mind flayer ever, period. But
oh man,
you
have to override a bunch of shit for that.
Yes.
And you also have to you would really have to pull up a good backstory for this. There's gonna be some writing on that to do.
And so that's something that I have confidence in myself. But as a DM, if I had a player approach me and say, I want to play a mind flayer, even as open-minded of a DM as I am, I'm going to say something like, well, how about we start with, I don't know, like a kobold sorceress or something a little bit more tame, still monstrous.
Because you're not going to be able to go into a town. You're not going to be able to go anywhere really without like, oh, hey guys, I'm really good.
Well, and then there's like the significant problem of feeding yourself and those sort of things. Those are all things you have to think about. A mind flayer eats brains, specifically intelligent brains. Whose brains are you eating as a good mind flayer? That's a huge problem. So unless you're able to tackle these huge role-playing problems, I would not approach any of those very exotic races.
Right. So Drago says that Dragonborn. Okay, not Dragonborn. You were talking Dragonkin. So again, they have. And here's something, and so this was in 3.5, but again, as a character, again, it would have to be something that you work with your game master on, your DM, because again, if the Dragonkin have wings and are very exotic looking, where are they going to be able to go in that world? And would you want to play one that is like, say, I'm the only Dragonkin in this world? Well, that I am aware of, and maybe your quest is to find others like you. And there's some classic storylines that you can go by, but again, we talked about all those reactions and all the obstacles that you would have to do, and so that's the other thing. You've got the players that are wanting to play a monstrous race because they just think it's cool. But then also the ones, and whether it fits in the world or not. And then you've got the players that are like, I want some disadvantages. I want to have to overcome the racist, humans that are in this town, or I want to overcome these obstacles. Yes, am I too overpowered for the party? because that's the thing too. Oh, you've got wings, great, you can just fly everywhere. So how does that look? What people see you if they see it? Are you going to get shot? What kind of obstacles? So you got the player that really wants to take those challenges of that race on and embrace them and really make that, because it's all about great role playing. Yeah, it's all about the story. It's all about really making something different. I guess my problem, like I said before, was I most of the players that I run into that want to play that are just wanting it to be cool. Well, they don't really care about what world you're playing, and they don't really care about what obstacles might come up. And then they'll get very angry if you challenge those, if you put more obstacles up. Like, all right, you walk in and you're dragon can't. Okay, cool. You guys go into the tavern. It's full of humans. Everybody draws their sword. In fact, you've got like 3 arrows now sticking out of you the minute you walk in, or immediately a brawl breaks out. So I think it's you have to be prepared for all of that.
Well, and what I'll say about that is, I think perhaps Drago brings up a really good point that the dragonkin are born via a ritual. So if you wanted to play a special snowflake character and you just want them to look really cool,
right,
or have these special abilities of these monstrous races, there is a way to do that. You talk to your DM and you quest for a magical item or a magical ritual that does that. The end. You start off as a completely different race, and then over time you change into this race, or you have a ring that you put on that makes you have the features of that race. Approach it a way that is not your character, because then you can interact with standard situations as a standard race would. And so maybe then you get known as, well, this is the guy who wants to be a dragon. So over time, they're becoming more and more draconic, but they're still that good old knight that was a human at level 1, Yeah. That's a really good way to approach that if you're not willing to take on the role-playing risks and the campaign risks that are going to come with playing a monstrous character.
Right.
Playing a monstrous character really is treat it as a flaw. Treat it as...
I think that's super important.
Yeah, treat it as something that you understand that your character is going to have significantly harder challenges than other characters.
All right, so Drag also mentions that the like illusions and whatnot, being able to disguise yourself if you are going into an unfamiliar territory or one that's not going to be so accepting, being able to disguise yourself in a credible way that the DM is like, okay, I get that'll work. Illusions are great. So if you're traveling with an illusionist or a magic user, possibly there's a way to do that.
Well, and one of the ways that I've found really, really works well at early levels when you're most likely to be killed walking into a tavern is have the player characters treat you as a prisoner.
Oh, well, there you go.
It's a very interesting
teamwork,
role
Kyle.
play. So what you do is you get yourself a set of manacles. You have your rogue or someone else with some mechanical fortitude. Maybe you got a gnome in the party to engineer them so they look like normal manacles, but they don't actually lock you up.
Gnome, the IT guy of your adventuring party.
And that gives you an opportunity that they come into this place and everyone sees you as a prisoner, and they go, oh, well, it's no big deal. They're just going to take him to the constable and whatever. Maybe interview them. But then when the bandits attack, you pull off your gauntlets, you pull out your sword, and you start defending the women and children. And suddenly, even if they don't really like you, even if they're racist against you, you just save them.
Right.
So they've got to have that connection with you there.
So so here's the point. What about leveling up? So I know that you might be able to. Okay, so he also mentions here that you tone down some of the racial abilities. But what about leveling up? I mean, is there a way to take if you don't have the resources that actually has it completely drawn out? Like here is the kobold as a player character. How do you go about leveling up this? Because for me now, looking at it, like if you're a ranger or if you're a warlock, you get special abilities for each level that you go up. How do you do that, and what are those things going to be for say a kobold, or say you want to be a genocide or whatnot. If you don't have this, again, something that you have to work out with your dungeon master to say this going, or do you guys maybe out there, maybe there's some people that have some great resources on how that works, but how would you handle that then? Because you're going to have to DM again, like I said, extra work. He's going to have to level you up, and that's going to again be on the player's thing. How do you level up?
So what I will say to that is that the Dungeon Master's Guide provides a very, very reasonable way of constructing new races. Start there. That has a very balanced way of constructing new races. It's got great examples. It shows you how to make the Aasimar, the angel people, right there. And it talks about the sort of steps that you would go through to do that. If you are playing a race that does not fit that because they have significant advantages at early levels. So, for example, if you're playing a Minotaur, and Minotaurs have a ridiculous amount of strength, so they're typically higher level just as a base race.
Right.
I think that would be a wonderful opportunity to work out with your DM some reason that your Minotaur is still a Minotaur, but they're growing into Minotaurhood. So they start off and maybe they've been cursed. So they start off with only the stats of an orc.
Right. No, I see that. Okay. And yeah, that's kind of what I did with my Minotaur. So it was one of those things where he was a young ranger kind of thing, lived outdoors and stuff. So I do miss that guy. Borf, he's a great one. All right. So what other, so we've got the DM's guide as a resource, but what are some other resources out there? Of course, if anybody's got some, please post it here in the comment section down below. But where else would you go as far as finding a resource, say, or maybe that you're coming up with your own monstrous class that's not in any of the Involos or the monster manual or something like that, like you've done before?
So really useful here is to actually take an opportunity to step outside the realm of 5th edition and step to an edition that does lots of races very well. And that's actually Pathfinder. Pathfinder has every race imaginable.
Yes.
Statted, and the reasons why it's statted and what they're going about. So chances are, if you want to design a new race or you want to do a race and you have no clue where to start, go look at Pathfinder, see how they approached it, and then sort of work backwards from there and adopt it to the 5th edition. There's also, if you don't mind looking through sort of more edited content, James brings up a really good point. There's the D&D wikis and a lot of the homebrew aspects there. Approach those with caution. And the reason I say approach those with caution is because I tend to be a DM that I homebrew a lot, but I've got a pretty good sense of game balance.
Right.
And I tend to balance
the key, yeah.
I tend to balance things pretty heavy-handedly. I'm going to give you some harsh negatives and then work the positives in from there. I would rather have something be underpowered and make it more challenging to the character than overpowered. And a lot of homebrew things tend to be very overpowered.
I think that's easy to do for any player who maybe is even an inexperienced player who again is all about playing that that crazy cool class. I want to be this because it looks cool and I know I love these things. So yeah, I think overpowering is my main concern really, because they're monsters and they're typically more powerful than your typical human or gnome. So like I believe Drago said that he tones his races down. You can modify your abilities. You can certainly modify or hinder the stats, especially like you said, if you were working with creating a monster class and considering that basically just because you're a monstrous class, that's a disadvantage. That's a hindrance. So,
well, so for example,
flaw, you said, yes.
I wanted to have a ooze race. I wanted to have a race of characters that were slime people.
Right.
And the reason that interested me is, one, because of blind sight. And blind sight's a really interesting mechanic where basically you see for a certain distance and you see nearly perfectly, but beyond that, you're completely blind. And I found that really, really compelling as, well, what would a race like that be like? And then I also wanted them to have some other unique abilities. Like there's all of the different kinds of slimes. So maybe an ochre ooze has a climbing ability. So maybe an ochre ooze character would also be able to climb super well. Maybe not as well as a normal ochre ooze, but definitely enough to scale trees and walls and those sort of things at a decent clip. So the way I worked that to construct that for my own world is I said, okay, well, we're going to start major disadvantage. They have blind sight. It's an advantage as long as they're within 60 feet because it's true sight. They're not going to have to worry about invisibility. Something that we actually ran into in one of my campaigns.
That was confusing. Yeah.
Yeah.
You didn't tell us at first why they could to see why we couldn't see something that the character could. I couldn't understand that. And also, because you can see invisibility. That's handy. That's really nice.
Basically, I had a character, DnD5e, in this world who's a barbarian ooze person.
Right.
And they have this blind sight. Well, Wayne here rolled 10 times on the random magic table because of circumstances.
Oh yeah.
And turned some rats invisible. Well, there was one rat left, and my character is like, well, why can't you see the rat? It's right there. It's right in front of you. Just hit it. You know, and they're a barbarian. They don't have the highest wisdom. In fact, their wisdom was their dump stat. So they're going, well, why aren't you hitting it? And everyone else is going, it's invisible. And they're like, well, what's invisible? You know,
they have no concept of invisibility. That's interesting.
And no concept of color. So if you run into a color puzzle or something like that, well, maybe they can sort of taste the difference if they touch it because they're ooze people and they taste with their hands and things like that. Yeah. But you have to think of that. Blind sight's amazing as a combat ability, but it's also horrible as a combat ability. Imagine if all of your wizarding spells, including things like Fireball and Meteor Storm and Sphere of Annihilation, all have a maximum of 60 feet.
Yeah, that'd be ouchy.
Yeah, that's
challenging and ouchy.
Sure, you can aim perfectly, but you can't go beyond 60 feet. And so that was where I started because that was a really compelling idea to me. And then I went beyond that. I said, okay, well, that's pretty strong. And I still want them to have another unique ability so I can build these sort of sub races. So you have like a fire slime and like a celestial slime.
Yeah.
And so I said, well, how do I make it so that they're even more vulnerable? Well, they're a race that's known, and there's a fair amount of racism against them. And so what I did is I said, well, they all have a core. And this core is essentially a called shot spot. You can say, okay, well, number one, they're not wearing armor, so I can see their core, or their core is exposed through their armor. So instead of just attacking them, I'm going to attack their core. You hit it, you deal critical damage.
Right.
Period. You crit it, you deal critical damage, and then you add another set of critical dice to it. You deal a lot of damage to them. And then beyond that, they have to make a save, or they get sort of stunned because you've essentially hit what amounts to their brain.
That's kind of what that Draga Black here says, that the way he plays the skeletons is that they have an amulet that binds soul to the skeleton so that it has intelligence.
Yes.
And it is basically running that, the bones and keeping them together and keeping that magical energy together to keep the bones together. So that's also, again, a hindrance, yet it could also be an advantage.
Yes. And so what I would say is with your races, like I said, be more heavy-handed on the disadvantages than the advantages. So
because it's interesting.
Yes. A lot of times the best characters you can have are characters that are going to have a lot of flaws and a lot of trouble. That makes the story interesting. It gives them a compelling reason, and it makes things difficult. That's why we have so many fond memories of those old tournament modules like Tomb of Horrors, because Tomb of Horrors was hard.
It was super hard, and you could die pretty easily in it. And
Ow. So if you take the same approach with building your races and you say, okay, well, humans are really good. They're just really good. Elves are pretty good. Dwarves are pretty good. Let's make a monstrous race that's unique but isn't good. So then you give less of an incentive for player characters to abuse the stats of it, and more of an incentive for player characters to play it because they want to be that unique character.
And they have the ability to do that. But you know, in the end, to me, I think that whatever you play just needs to complement the adventure, and it needs to complement the campaign setting. It needs to complement your party.
Yes.
And then it also needs to not be work for the dungeon master that is not inspired.
Now, what I will say is that while don't make it work for the dungeon master, make it a little bit of work for the other players. You can develop some really stimulating relationships and some very interesting stories by working those interactions between players. Not only that, the more player-to-player interactions you have, the more time you give for the DM to take care of what they need to do. How many times have you come into a room and the DM's going, okay, well, give me a second because I'm totaling up, treasure and those sorts of things? That's a wonderful time for you to have a character-to-character interaction where maybe the Dragonborn in the party talks to the Kobold in the party and goes, so I heard you in that last fight, you rolled a critical and it was pretty good, but you said, and that's how a dragon does it. Well, you're not a dragon, you're a kobold. And then the kobold goes, Yark, I'm a kobold, but I'm also a dragon, just like you. And I will show you how I'm a dragon. And then you sort of get this friendly banter, or sometimes not so friendly. But it makes for these really deep relationships that lend us really good role-playing aspect to it. Games flow better the more that your characters interact.
Right, exactly. And there is chemistry there too, and I think everybody knows. Again, it's one of those things where I said it has to flow well with the party, but you still have to have good chemistry with the other players as people, and as characters. Whether you have conflict between them or whether you have teamwork, and I don't know. I think that's my take on bringing somebody, especially if there's only one monstrous race in a party.
Well, so for example, in my campaign, you were just running a fairly standard cleric.
Yep.
Then we had Angel, one of our friends, was running a rogue as his actual first character. I think that was the first character that he's made entirely
it was
on
his first D&D character for sure. And we've gotten to this sort of really interesting situation where we've got this really strong-headed barbarian monstrous character, and then this cleric who's not really used to monstrous characters in general is sort of siding with the rogue, and then the rogue and the barbarian sort of have a friendly bet going. And I think it's led to some very interesting dynamics between the party as a whole. Yeah. And I think that that's something too, is that I was thinking about bringing a monstrous race into a party that has new players, and how that can, again, that's something that the dungeon master is going to have to consider, is going to have to allow. And then because we were just talking about how the new players, we want them to have to really work on the book standard character classes, and then advance onto that. So when you bring in one and they're like, well, I'm just playing an elf, Yeah, an elf
Well,
fighter.
that sounds really cool.
Wow, you're playing a minotaur. How is that person going to deal with that too, with not having that context? So again, another obstacle or another challenge to look at when you're playing a monstrous race, especially in your campaign. Hey, you know what? We are about out of time, Joe. I think we could probably leave it here. You have some things that you want to put up on our site too, or maybe that we can put up on the Dungeon Created Adventures Guild. I'm also going to put it up on our DnD5e page on Facebook. You can check it out there. We might actually, if we can get some links to it, put it up on the in the podcast page. If you're there at DnD5epodcast.com, you can check that out. And well, hopefully we can have some different homebrew monster classes up there.
Yeah, I think I can probably put together some character sheets
or some examples of
I'll bring the twins.
Yeah.
And then I'll flesh out some fluff for the monstrous races that I have for my own world, and we can sort of put those up and be a couple examples of those. Never forget, first thing with a character, always develop that nice backstory. So if you haven't hit up that backstory podcast, the last one, that's very nice as an introduction to sort of the storytelling style that you want to go for with a monstrous race.
Because regardless, there's going to be that template, whether you're, no matter what race you are. It's just a general background template and what you're going to need and what's important, what's not important.
Yes.
But yeah, so I think we're going to leave it here for this monstrous class, for this podcast. I think we might stay on a little bit longer on the live end of things and chat a little bit. But otherwise, yeah, thanks for joining the DnD5e podcast once again. Hopefully you're gonna come back every week. We're doing stuff, right? So we should.
Yeah.
We're hoping to actually be putting out these podcasts on a more consistent basis. We've got a lot to say. We've got some great stuff happening. So yeah, we'll come up with another topic, and I like the live thing, so we're going to continue to do that. You can follow us on YouTube, subscribe to the DnD5e podcast or DnD5e TV, and then you can go to and also subscribe to the DnD5e podcast, in which we've got all sorts of different interviews on there. I've got what we're also going to have on the video channel here on DnD5e TV is going to have some different reviews and overviews of products and different things that you can get. So yeah.
And actually, if you have any questions or good topics that you would like to ask either of us about,
yes,
or something that's really interesting to you that you would like to hear in a podcast, go ahead and send us some of that information, and we'll see if we can hit you up.
Yeah, the DnD5e podcast is basically we're not a play podcast, so you won't really get any of the live play there. We like to go through. We started the podcast by opening up the book. None of us knew how to play, really. We were just switching over our characters to 5th edition from 2nd edition, and it was very exciting. So we're trying to go through all the classes, all the races, different aspects of playing, from new people that are just getting into D&D and are starting with 5th edition. For those people that have been like us from the start, learning along with you, and things you can do. And the reason why it's such a great addition as far as being able to expand your universe that way. So until next time, my name is Wayne.
My name is Joe.
And we'll see you on the DnD5e podcast. All right, cool. And so, hey, guys, I just wanted to say, since we were doing the podcast, sometimes I don't necessarily react to everybody on here. I know we've got a couple of people on the live chat. Thanks for joining us. Yeah, like you said, this is James Stevenson. Yes. Who was on here? Squatting Heads, and Drago Black. So yes, new content. It's been a lot. We've had a lot of podcasts and stuff, but the DnD5e podcast, DnD5e TV has a lot more subscribers. We've got over 2,000 subscribers. One of the videos got almost 500. What was it? Almost 400,000 views on that, which is great. So I want to start adding in more content to our video section, and I think the live versions are going to be great because we can talk to people from here. And also it's going to be recorded. So we're having a little bit more straightforward type of live video until the end when we can take questions and whatnot. And we'll also keep recording on that and letting people know, that way I can edit in and do whatnot. So So yeah, I'm not sure how we're going to go with that, but again, this is all coming from new ideas and things. We want to try and do something different than the other podcasts that are doing, other video casts are doing, and that is to kind of take you along with us on the adventure of 5th edition, and just some of the things that we find out. We're in, the Dungeon Crate. Dungeon Crate is our life right now, and that's what the business that I do. But it's also opened me up to a whole lot of different gaming opportunities, and coming and being able to play with a lot more people. So I really hope if you guys have any questions or things that you want us to cover, like Joe said, please send us an email. If you want to do that, you can send that to DnD5e TV. What was it? DnD5e podcast.com or
at Gmail, I think.
Yeah, isn't it? Or Wayne at dungeoncrate.com. But you can also just leave a comment right here. If you leave a comment on the videos, that'll get to me as well, and we can figure that out. I'm actually
actually, if you have any questions, feel free to post them in the Adventurers Guild, or I think the Adventurers Guild would probably work best
if you're part of that.
And feel free to ping me and Wayne, and we can chime in more directly there.
Right.
As an answer to maybe some of the questions, I forget if I answered. The Kobold twins are synergistic. When they're out in the sunlight, they're always within 5 feet of each other, so they sort of undo their sunlight sensitivity by using pack tactics.
Oh, really? All right.
Which helps them greatly when they're moving out and about. And I think that's in the backstory for them. That's part of the reason that they were able to branch out. They're actually both spies.
Now I know.
Yeah. So they ended up branching out more, and I think it was because the pair of them were both a little bit more adventurous, and then they were able to always be next to each other, so they didn't have quite as much of a risk as a normal set of kobolds in going out above ground.
Yeah, I think the Minotaur has been the only monstrous race I've played.
We'll have to get you to.
I found a really great a picture of one. It was more like a very thin, instead of a bodybuilder, muscly one. This was more of a. I got to show you this picture because it really. And that's the other thing too. I was thinking about. We talked to finding different looks of these monster races so that you can build your character around it. So this monster, this Minotaur, like I said, was a ranger, and he was almost he loved the outdoors and the forest, took care of the outdoors, and was very very much a good ranger, you might say, but wasn't your typical big crushing Minotaur with this huge body and just towering above. He was very more thin, and his body was a lot more of, say, your classical Greek looking type of body for a male. It wasn't a bodybuilder style, and he was young, so it was still trying to get out there, and that kind of thing. You can do that too, and that might be something that your DM would allow you to do, is to be a partial monster race or something, or have the attributes of a monster class or a monster race while incorporating it into the same class.
Well, I think that's one of the things that you can do with undead and lycanthropes really, really easily is actually you work in a in-world way to quote unquote cure lycanthropy or undeath, like the amulet. Or in my personal homebrew world, we've actually got what's called holy well water, which is a natural spring of holy water that's very special, and when you imbue it in a certain way, it will actually cure a lot of these magical maladies. But it doesn't cure them entirely. Basically, it reverts your stats back to the stats of the original race that you were. So if you were a human lycanthrope, you end up becoming a human again, stat-wise, but as your actual features, for example, if you were a normal lycanthrope, you might end up having dog ears and canine teeth and a tail. So you're no longer,
other special abilities.
You're no longer a human, and you're not really a lycanthrope. you're somewhere in between, and there's this sort of cultural worry around it that, you know, especially if you're something like a vampire or a zombie, that, well, we know they're cured, but are they really cured?
Are they cured?
Yeah, you know, zombies are mindless, and this is definitely not mindless, but what if it's just a greater undead fooling us now?
Yes. Well, that's cool. All right. So let's see here. Squatting Heads. Yeah, new content. Yeah, like I talked to you a little bit about that. Hopefully we'll be having new content up every week. And if you want even more, again, we've been doing a lot of things the past 2 years, and it's called this Dungeon Crate. If you are looking at, you want similar stuff like this, kind of want to catch up on stuff, we do a lot of live stuff, again, on Dungeon Crate. We're going to be doing that on Twitch, on our Facebook Live, as well as YouTube. But for DnD5e TV, it's not Dungeon Crate centric. So we are going to be talking all about role playing, and you know, and I think we've done a lot of things in the past. If you go back and listen to some of the shows, we've done some interviews on. They're going to have some more interviews from different people in the industry on the DnD5e podcast. We're going to have interviews from makers and manufacturers of D&D stuff, you know, accessory stuff, and that's one benefit I have with running Dungeon Crate with this podcast, is that I can talk to some of these people that are making some amazing accessories, amazing role-playing tools for us as players and game masters. So if you are a new player or a veteran player, I'm hoping that this podcast and videocast is going to be something that you guys are going to really get some benefit from. So hopefully that works like that.
And James,
everybody needs a giant squishy D20. Urgh.
And James, it's super good to hear that that they're helping you out as a new-ish player.
Yeah.
I consider myself to be pretty apt at role playing and D&D in general, and I have a lot of really enjoyable experience. So I would love to be able to sort of bring that to newer players and inspire newer players to be better role players, because I think some of the worst sessions I've ever had are those sessions where everyone's just there and you roll dice and you attack. You roll dice and you attack.
And then you wait your turn.
Yeah, and that to me is boring. I love the sessions where everyone's got so much role playing that their actual characters start to come out, and they start to step over each other in voices. You know, you've got the rogue is trying to say something as the sorcerer is trying to go, wait, no, we need to do this. And then the bard comes and goes, hey, well, why don't we just go to the tavern and pick up a couple wenches?
And hey, why is the rogue passing a note to the dungeon master? That's not fair. Wait, who are you texting? Why are you answering that, DM? Yeah, so that's always fun too.
Yes, the oratory.
Yeah. I mean, and it is something, or and by good oratory, that doesn't mean just verbacious. Is that a word I want to use? I think so.
Or loquacious.
Verbose. You don't want somebody that's just going to talk and talk and talk for no fucking purpose. I want a DM that will put me in that adventure. Give me enough engaging storytelling and tell it in a way that is not monotone, so that you are just reading from the page. Put me into it. Get me thinking in my head. When I was a kid and we started playing this in '83, man, I remember still we didn't have any of these accessories, man. There was nothing like this. I didn't have any of this bullshit. We had a grid paper that we actually mapped everything out on 8.5 by 11, and we had figures just to put on the table, and we used just dice or whatever else we had to show terrain or whatever. But really, it was all about. I can picture my DM. My DM was a writer, but he would do just enough and get us engaged just enough that I can remember almost every adventure. Like I could picture it in my head. That was what I loved about role playing, was that I didn't need amazing artwork or handouts. I didn't need that. The DM can actually put that in there, and I created it all myself in my head. I knew exactly what this tavern looked like, and I knew exactly what the caves looked like on Barrier Peaks that we were going through, and I knew what not Barrier Peaks, Keep on the Borderlands, And yeah, barrier peaks too. They have the maps, but usually the old modules, they only gave you just a little bit of artwork. You got a snippet here or a snippet there, or maybe a full page work of art, that really showcased an end goal or an end treasure. And wow, that is something we can do a whole podcast on. I think if we got some DMs together, or even DMs and players together, we could do a chat online. Not only can we do it through what me and Joe are doing, but we'd love to have some people on
and Floyd in.
Right, and just talk about how
Floyd and
Kevin, yeah, exactly. Yeah. Because Floyd and Kevin have two different DM styles, and Kevin is not necessarily he does get into some things, and I think Kevin does a lot of Roll20 stuff, and that's also another thing, DMing Roll20. How do you make your Roll20 game when you DM that? How are you making that interesting for your players? Because we're all in separate places, we're not next to each other. How do you make that interesting? That could also be a good topic to do as well.
Well, I think the four of us all together have very different DMing styles, and they mesh super well. I don't think I've run into any problems in any of our games together between either of us being either DM or player.
Yeah, no, I don't think so at all.
And there's certainly been some instances where like you were talking about, the importance of the words is not necessarily that they're very pretty, but their impact.
Right.
So, for example, I sometimes make the conscious decision to really get into and describe an action that's going on. So like you were throwing out Eldritch Blasts, I think it was. And I said, oh, well, you just did like 8 damage to something with 1 health. So that's what I was thinking. But out loud, I said, so you really cock back your hand and you throw out this Eldritch Blast, and it just makes a perfectly round hole. And then part of the thing I do as a DM is if you say something and you want something done, I'll let you run with it. If you don't say anything, I'm not going to do anything about it.
Right.
So one of the things that either you or Angel said was, well, so does it hit the one behind them? And I go, roll for it.
Right. Yeah.
Well, because that's not an effect that's there, but why not? It's cool. It's not really going to affect the actual play of this particular campaign all that much. So why not do it? It's cool. It makes a memorable moment.
Exactly.
And you rolled for it and missed.
Yeah, I think a dungeon master one would be great. We'll set that up. I think I can get Floyd to come in on a weekend or something like that, or come in after work, drive down from Lincoln to Omaha, and we can have a live session, or we'll have him up there. We can always Google chat him in, as even Kevin too. Yeah. Or you can have you come over, or we can all do it from our homes. I don't know, but I think it'd be fun to have everybody here interacting with each other, talking about it in person. We can do that too, and that way we can also ping out if you guys have any questions for DMs like that we can kind of talk about, just like, hey, I want to DM, say, but mainly like, how do you deal with these kind of conflicts? How do you deal? And I always had things like, I want to do another topic on tech at the table. How do you deal with players that are, and actually I should bring in my other friend who is a female. She's a girl that is in our Kat. I'm talking about, forget. Yeah. I just haven't seen you at HEMA for a while, but Kat has played and DM'd her first session, and she plays with a bunch of other guys, and sometimes she has some issues with the guys, or other players that are not respectful to the DM or listening or things like that. How would you deal with that? So I think a DM one might be pretty cool.
Ooh, another one. I know we've talked about this before, but maybe just putting it out there as a topic. I really like mundane items. We should talk about mundane items.
Mundane magic items, right? Or just mundane items?
Mundane items in general.
I
do some of the mundane magic items would be good too. Like for example, in my campaign, we have the Bag of Endless Caltrops, and
which is awesome.
Yeah, you super lit up when you heard that one, and you're like, they're endless. What? And I was like, yeah, there's some stipulations, but it's endless. That's one of my favorite ones because it's It's not a particularly world-breaking thing. You know, you only toss out one handful around and that sort of stuff. But they're super cool for letting you use what's already in the mundane items, but you don't have to carry around, you know, 30 pounds of caltrops if you want to lay down a battlefield of caltrops.
Well, we'll have people send in some topics, and then we're gonna have to tackle those on top of the interviews. Oh, and the other thing that we're gonna be doing, for those of you watching this, is we're gonna do a series of teaching people how to play D&D. So if you have some people that have not played D&D before, I'm going to be learning with Lori. So I'm going to be teaching my wife Lori, who's co-founder of DC, and teaching her. She's exposed to all this D&D stuff and has been since we've known each other. But she's never actually sat down and played a game for the most part. So what we're going to do is I'm going to sit down. We're going to take some sections. We'll do some shorter episodes, real short episodes on, hey, we're rolling up our stats. And here's what stats do. And here's what they are. And hey, now we're going to do equipment. Or now we're going to do the, the skills and what that means. And kind of go through the whole process of, and like armor class, because I always have my ideas on what armor class is and what happens when the simple thing that they may not get is that, I roll and I miss. Well, did I just miss? Did I actually miss? Or what happened? That's a parry. That is armor.
Natural armor.
Yeah. So there's a lot of things that I think that as veteran players, we take for granted that we can actually enlighten some newer players. So that's also going to be a topic on there that you're going to see here. So there you go. I'm getting hungry, man. I got to go eat. I need some lunch. I had a bagel. We brought bagels, but well, hey, hopefully you guys, we can do this again. We're going to do this on Tuesdays after the live, the Tuesday or Wednesdays after the DC live, because I'm not sure if we're going to still do, I think Tuesdays we might do DC live, but either way, when you're here moderating that, we'll end up going live again for the podcast, or we're going to do it the next, I'll figure it out. But either way, we'll have some live stuff. So subscribe and whatnot.
And we'll also want to time it with Matt, because he's got his dungeon doodles.
Oh, yeah, that's right. So we may actually be doing it on a separate day. I don't know. I'll talk to Matt. We'll find out. So, all right, guys. Hey, Drago, James, Squatting Heads. You guys, thanks for joining us today. And everybody else, if you're watching this after the fact, you can go ahead and listen to the edited version of the podcast if you didn't listen to all this. And of course, go to DnD5e podcast.com. You can subscribe there. You can check it out there, support our sponsors, but otherwise, go check that out as well and check out all the other episodes. All right, guys, we're going to end the stream, but hey, catch you guys later.